If you watched all the previous videos in this tutorial series, by now you should have a really good understanding of how to use TransparentMeta in your applications and how to integrate it. What I'm going to do in this video is going to give you a high-level overview of the architecture of TransparentMeta. Specifically, I want to talk about some architectural decisions that we took when we designed TransparentMeta. As a very high-level overview, what we did was loosely following clean architecture as introduced by Robert C. Martin. If you're not familiar with clean architecture, unfortunately, I don't have really the time to go deep into it, but I would highly suggest you that you read this book by Robert C. Martin because it's really, really good. But as I said, we didn't implement the whole framework, the clean architecture framework, but just took some inspiration from it and we followed some principles. So first of all, we built TransparentMeta and divided it into multiple layers. And so there are more inner layers and outer layers. We did this so that we can separate concerns across different layers. And we also have implemented a rule that is that inner layers should not depend on outer layers, because at the innermost parts of the application of the library we have things that are very central to the application, and we'll see what these are. Now, by implementing some of these principles, we made the library very testable and maintainable. And indeed, the library is 100% covered in terms of unit tests and integration tests. But now let's jump into the code base. So I'm going to talk about all the different layers and what they do. We're back again into the transparent metadata code base. I'm going to jump into the transparent meta package, and as you can see, there are a bunch of sub packages, and these correspond to different components of our architecture. So the highest level component, the one that most users would use, is the SDK component. And in here, you have all the factory functions for generating the main objects that are actually the library interfaces that we were using in previous videos for reading and writing metadata information into our audio files. So SDK is the sort of entry point for most users. Then we can jump into the innermost parts of our architecture, and that would be entity. So here we have all the main domain components of our architecture, and that is, in our case, metadata. So metadata is literally the most important information, and we bundled that into a data class. It's not really a data class, it's a Pydantic class. That's basically a data class with some benefits on top if you're familiar with Pydantic. But yeah, that's what it is. So that's the entity. So that's the innermost part, the most critical part of our architecture. Then we jump one layer towards the outside, towards the external part of it, and we jump onto the use case component. The use case component is responsible for all the different use cases. The name gives it away. What are these use cases? Well, that's the business logic. And what's the business logic that we have here in TransparentMeta? Well, mainly two things. We read stuff and we write stuff, and that stuff is obviously transparency metadata. And indeed, if we open use case, you'll see that it's divided internally into two sub packages, one for reading and the other one for writing. I'm not going to get into the details of the implementation because that's outside of the scope of this video, but I want to give you an overview here. So right, use case is used for handling the business logic. And then if we keep jumping towards the outside of the architecture, we can also meet the request and result. So request is the input that gets directly from the user into the architecture. And so it's an important boundary there. And then we have result, which is the actual mirror of it. That is what we give to the user. And so as you can imagine, these are, once again, mainly data classes where we do some sort of a validation of them, especially for the request, because we have to validate that the information incoming is actually valid, so that we can then move that information into like the inner circles of our architecture. So yeah, for the request, we have a couple of requests. So there's a read request and there's a write request, and we have also like some validators to validate like that the requests are actually good, because otherwise we're going to just like throw an error. For the results, like we have one results module where we're going to bundle like for example, like the read results, like as we saw earlier in a previous video, and we just like push that information onto the user. Then we also have a serialization component, and here, as you can imagine, we just have facilities for serializing and deserializing data. So it's kind of like utility thing, like that's usually bundled with requests and results. Cool. So then we have a package that's called crypto. That's kind of like a per se package. It's not necessarily like part like of the main like clean architecture. Here it's just like its own package, and as you can imagine here we have a bunch of classes and utility functions like that we use for handling like cryptographic processes. And from here you'll remember the key management module, which is the module from which like we drew a lot of the functions that deal with key pair loading, storing, and generation. Okay, and finally we simply have a utils package, and as you can imagine here we just have like some utility functions that are organized into different modules depending, and so that they're grouped together semantically. So here we have like some encoding utils, of course like some custom exceptions or file utils, and metadata tags util. But that's it. Now you have a high level understanding of the different components that make up TransparentMeta.